He was the first president ever impeached, and by the time Congress was done with him, much of the nation wished he had never set foot in the White House at all. His name was Andrew Johnson, a tailor from Tennessee who climbed to the highest office in the land, only to spend his presidency at war with the very people who had put him there. What he did with that power would fracture the country all over again just when it had begun to heal, but that was not the worst of it. What came next would shape the lives of millions for generations. Johnson was born in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1808. His family was poor. His father died when he was 3. He never attended a day of school. He was apprenticed to a tailor as a boy and ran away. By his 20s, he had opened his own tailor shop in Greenville, Tennessee, and taught himself to read with the help of his wife, Eliza. He entered politics as a Democrat, and he never forgot where he came from. He spoke for the small farmer, the working man, the white Southerner who owned no slaves. He hated the planter elite. He believed they had dragged the South into a ruinous war. When Tennessee seceded, Johnson stayed. He was the only senator from a seceding state who remained in Congress. He received death threats. He was burned in effigy in the South. Lincoln saw in him a Southern Unionist, a symbol of reconciliation. When Union forces took Tennessee, Lincoln made Johnson military governor. Johnson held that post until 1864, when Lincoln chose him as his running mate. A Democrat alongside a Republican, a Southerner on a unity ticket. 1 year later, Lincoln was dead, and Andrew Johnson was president. At the time, no one could have known how much would hang on that single twist of fate. What happened next would define his place in history. The Civil War had ended. 4 million enslaved people were free. The question was how the nation would rebuild. Lincoln had favored a moderate path. Johnson claimed he would follow it. He talked of punishing treason and protecting the freedmen. In his first months, he even spoke of making treason odious. But the man who had once opposed the slaveholding class now revealed another side. The shift was swift, and it would have consequences no one could yet see. He was a white supremacist. He believed black people were inferior. He had no intention of giving them the vote or real power. He issued amnesty to former Confederates in waves. He allowed Southern states to elect former rebels. He stood by as those states passed black codes. Laws that bound freed people to low wages, restricted their movement, and denied them rights. In Mississippi, freedmen could be arrested for vagrancy if they had no job. In South Carolina, black people were barred from work except as servants or farmers unless they paid a tax. The South, in effect, was trying to restore something very close to slavery, and the President of the United States was letting it happen. Johnson had laid out his own plan for Reconstruction. He required Southern states to abolish slavery and renounce secession. Beyond that, he asked little. He did not require them to give black men the vote. He did not require them to protect the freedmen's rights. He handed out pardons by the thousands. Former Confederate officials were soon back in power. When Congress convened in December 1865, many of the men who had led the rebellion were back in the Capitol as elected representatives. The North was stunned. The Republicans in Congress refused to seat them. The clash between the president and the legislature had begun. What happened next would push the country to the brink. Congress had had enough. In 1866, the radical Republicans took the lead. They had already created the Freedmen's Bureau to help former slaves with food, schools, and labor contracts. When Congress voted to extend and strengthen it, Johnson vetoed that too. He said it was an overreach of federal power. Then he went further. On Washington's birthday in 1866, he gave a speech from the White House. He named his Republican opponents. He accused them of plotting his assassination. The crowd in the street cheered. The break was complete. Soon after, they passed the Civil Rights Act to protect the freedmen. Johnson vetoed it. He said it went beyond the Constitution. Congress overrode his veto. It was the first time in American history that a major piece of legislation became law over a president's objection. Then came the 14th Amendment defining citizenship and equal protection. Johnson opposed it. He told the Southern states not to ratify it. He campaigned against the Republicans in the midterm elections. He called his opponents traitors. He compared himself to Christ and said they were crucifying him. The voters responded. The Republicans won in a landslide. The country had chosen Reconstruction over the president. In the South, violence had already flared. In Memphis in May 1866, white mobs and police attacked black neighborhoods. Dozens of black people were killed. Churches and schools were burned. In New Orleans that summer, a convention of black and white Republicans was attacked by a mob. Again, dozens died. Johnson had done little to protect the freedmen. His silence in the face of that violence spoke as loud as his vetoes. His leniency toward the Old South had emboldened those who refused to accept the new order. But Johnson did not accept the verdict. He was not finished fighting. He did not yield. When Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act requiring Senate approval to remove certain officials, Johnson saw a trap. He wanted to fire his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, a Lincoln appointee who sided with the radicals. In August 1867, while the Senate was in recess, Johnson suspended Stanton and put Ulysses S. Grant in his place. When the Senate returned and refused to approve the removal, Grant stepped aside, and Stanton walked back into his office. Johnson was furious. He fired Stanton again. Stanton barricaded himself in the War Department and refused to leave. The House of Representatives moved to impeach the president for high crimes and misdemeanors. 11 articles were drawn up. Some focused on the Tenure of Office Act. Others accused him of bringing disgrace on the office and of trying to undermine Congress. The vote was 126 to 47. Andrew Johnson was the first president in American history to be impeached. What followed would test the Constitution itself. For a few weeks, the nation would hold its breath. His trial in the Senate began in March 1868. The galleries were packed. The country held its breath. For weeks, the arguments went back and forth. The managers for the House argued that Johnson had violated the Tenure of Office Act and had brought the office into disgrace. Johnson's defenders said the law was unconstitutional and that removing him would destroy the balance between the branches. The Constitution required a 2/3 majority to convict. On the first ballot, 35 senators voted guilty, 19 voted not guilty. 1 vote short. 7 Republicans had broken ranks and saved him. Pressure on those 7 had been immense. Some had been threatened. In the end, they had decided that removing a president for a dispute over a cabinet appointment was a step too far. He stayed in office, but he was broken. He had no real power left. He would never again challenge Congress on Reconstruction. He served out his term in isolation, issuing pardons to former Confederates and watching Congress run Reconstruction without him. When he left the White House in 1869, he returned to Tennessee. He ran for the Senate and lost. He ran for the House and lost. Then in 1875, he won a Senate seat again. He served only a few months before he died. He was buried with a copy of the Constitution, as he had requested. The irony was not lost on those who had fought him. In the years after his presidency, Reconstruction continued without him. The 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. Federal troops remained in the South, but the window was short, and the resistance Johnson had encouraged never fully went away. Historians have long debated his legacy. In survey after survey of scholars, he appears near the bottom of the rankings. Some argue he was a man of his time, that his racism was ordinary for a Southern Democrat. Others point to his early courage, his refusal to secede, his rise from poverty. They note that he was a self-made man in an age when that was rare. But the record is clear. The presidency is judged by what a leader does with power, and on that score, the verdict has been harsh. He betrayed the promise of emancipation. He sided with the old order. He fought the very laws that would have given meaning to freedom. Because of his choices, Reconstruction was weaker. The backlash was fiercer. The rights of black Americans were delayed and denied for generations. Jim Crow would follow, so would decades of disenfranchisement and violence. Historians still argue over how much one man could have changed that. But they agree on this: he did not try. The cost of that failure is still felt today. If this look at one of America's most divisive presidents made you think, like the video and subscribe for more stories from the past, told straight. His story is a reminder that who holds power matters, that compromise with injustice is not stability, and that the most dangerous moment for a democracy can come not in crisis, but in the aftermath, when the wrong leader chooses the wrong path. The man from Greenville had risen from nothing. He had stood against secession when it cost him everything. And then he had used the presidency to block the very future that Lincoln had died for. He had vetoed the Freedmen's Bureau. He had vetoed the Civil Rights Act. He had campaigned against the 14th Amendment. He had called his opponents traitors and compared himself to a martyr. When the chance came to unite the country around a new birth of freedom, he had chosen instead to side with the old one. The weight of that choice would outlast him by more than a century. We have other deep dives into the presidents who shaped the nation. If you want more of that, like the video and subscribe for new history every week. Andrew Johnson is often ranked among the worst presidents in American history. Not because he was weak, he was stubborn, he was defiant, he fought until the end, but because he had the chance to help heal the country and chose instead to deepen its wounds. The most hated president. Not by everyone. In the South, many white citizens saw him as a victim of Northern tyranny, but in the North, and among the freedmen he had abandoned, the anger ran deep. By enough to make the title stick. In the end, history has not been kind to the man who stood in the way. The first to be impeached, the one so many came to hate. He left behind a throne of ashes and a name synonymous with failure. Some leaders build nations, others simply serve as a warning.